There is a stretch of road in northern British Columbia. It runs for nearly 500 miles or about 725 kilometers. It connects the city of Prince Rupert on the coast to Prince George further inland. This road, Highway 16, cuts through a vast and rugged landscape. It passes through dense forests, towering mountains, isolated communities. For many, it is an essential link. It is a lifeline for travel, for work, for connecting with family. But this highway holds a darker story. It has earned a name that speaks of immense sorrow and unanswered questions. Locals don't just call it Highway 16. They call it the Highway of Tears. The name itself is a heavy one. It tells a story of loss before you even know the details. It suggests a place where grief is a constant companion on the journey. Along this lonely highway, dozens of women and girls have vanished. They have disappeared without a trace, leaving behind families caught in a nightmare of not knowing. Some were last seen walking along its shoulder. Others were trying to hitchhike to a nearby town. They were daughters, sisters, mothers, friends. Their disappearances stretch back decades, forming a chilling pattern of violence and loss that has haunted this region for generations. Why has this specific stretch of highway become such a focal point for tragedy? The reasons are complex and deeply rooted in the history of the area. The road is remote. Cell phone service is patchy at best, non-existent in many parts. The distances between towns are vast, leaving long stretches of isolated wilderness. For those without a car, hitchhiking often feels like the only option to get around. This vulnerability creates a dangerous situation. It creates an opportunity for those with violent intentions to prey on the unsuspecting, knowing that the dense woods on either side of the road can easily hide their terrible secrets. The name, Highway of Tears, wasn't created by officials or the media. It was born from the pain of the communities themselves. It was first used by the families of the victims, the people who live with the empty spaces left behind. It's a name that captures the collective heartbreak of so many indigenous families who have seen their loved ones stolen from them. It's a name that serves as a constant, somber reminder of the justice that is still missing. It's a plea for answers, a demand for change, and a memorial to the many lives that were cut short along this unforgiving road. The story of the Highway of Tears doesn't begin with a single dramatic event. It begins quietly, almost unnoticed. The disappearances started to accumulate over time, one by one. One of the first widely recognized cases was that of Gloria Moody. It was 1969. Gloria was a 26-year-old mother of two from the Squaw First Nation. She was last seen leaving a pub in the town of Williams Lake. Williams Lake is south of the main highway corridor, but part of the broader pattern. 10 days later, her body was found in the woods by a cattle trail. The investigation never resulted in any charges. Her case remains officially unsolved. Gloria's story set a tragic precedent. Her disappearance wasn't a major headline across the country at the time. It was a local tragedy, a deep wound for her family and community. But it was the beginning of a pattern that became clear in the years that followed. More women started to vanish. In 1973, 19-year-old Micheline Pear was last seen. She was on the highway trying to get from one town to another. 2 years later, her body was discovered. Like Gloria, her case remains unsolved. These early cases established a heartbreaking narrative. A woman disappears, her family waits in agony, answers never come. These were not just statistics or names on a list. They were vibrant young women with futures ahead of them. They had dreams and aspirations. They were loved. The lack of resolution created a sense of fear and frustration. For indigenous communities along the highway, it felt as though the lives of their women didn't matter to the outside world. The police investigations seemed to stall. The media coverage was minimal. It was as if their disappearances were being swallowed by the vast wilderness, and the world was simply letting it happen without a fight. This initial silence was deafening for the families. They were left to search on their own, to put up posters, to beg for information. They were grieving the loss of their loved one, and grieving the indifference they faced from the system that was supposed to protect them. The seeds of distrust were sown early on. The families felt abandoned, left to carry their burden alone. This feeling would only grow stronger as the years passed, and the list grew longer and longer. As the 1970s bled into the 1980s and 90s, the disappearances continued. The pattern became impossible to ignore. The victims were overwhelmingly young. Many were teenagers. The vast majority were indigenous. Women like Gail Ways, 13, vanished in 1974 while hitchhiking, or 16-year-old Ramona Wilson, who disappeared in 1994 on her way to meet friends. Ramona's family organized community searches. Her body was found nearly a year later near the local airport. Her murder has never been solved. To understand why the Highway of Tears became so dangerous, vertical bar, you must first understand the land it crosses. Highway 16 is more than just a road. Vertical bar, it is the main artery of northern British Columbia. It is a lifeline that carves its way through an immense and unforgiving wilderness, connecting a series of small, isolated towns and First Nations reserves that dot the landscape like lonely islands in a sea of trees. The danger of the Highway of Tears is woven directly into its geography. The sheer scale of the wilderness is, honestly, difficult to comprehend. We are talking about millions of acres of dense temperate rainforest, rugged mountain ranges. The woods are so thick that if you were to step just a few feet off the road, you could easily disappear from view. It offers countless remote logging roads, hidden clearings, and inaccessible gullies where a person or a vehicle could be concealed, potentially for years, before being accidentally discovered, if ever. The landscape itself becomes an unwilling accomplice to the violence. The danger found on the Highway of Tears is not just a product of its geography, it is deeply rooted in history. To understand why so many Indigenous women are vulnerable, we must look at generations of systemic policies that fractured communities and stripped resources. The legacy of colonialism in Canada has had a devastating direct impact. For over a century, the residential school system forcibly removed Indigenous children from their families, subjecting them to abuse and attempting to erase language and culture. That created deep intergenerational trauma that still affects families and communities today. This produced secondary issues: poverty, higher rates of addiction, domestic violence in some communities. These are not inherent failings, they are predictable, painful symptoms of historical oppression. In this landscape of isolation and economic hardship, hitchhiking is not a choice made for adventure or convenience. It is often a desperate necessity. For many people in small reserves and towns along Highway 16, owning a reliable car is a financial impossibility. Public transportation is extremely limited, in many areas non-existent. For many young women, the only answer? Stand on the side of the road and stick out a thumb. A gamble, a calculated risk, because there are no other viable choices. Each name on the list of the missing is more than just a statistic. It is a life story, a future that was stolen. Take Ramona Wilson. In 1994, Ramona was a vibrant 16-year-old living in Smithers, British Columbia. She was a daughter. She was a sister. She was a friend, known for her bright smile and her love of sports. On Saturday, June 11, 1994, Ramona was getting ready to meet her friends. She was last seen at an intersection on Highway 16. Ramona had become the latest young woman to vanish along that haunted stretch of road. When Ramona Wilson vanished, her family did not sit back and wait. They sprang into action, driven by a fierce love and a refusal to let her be forgotten. The family organized community searches, gathering volunteers to comb the dense woods, remote backroads surrounding Smithers. They walked for miles, calling out Ramona's name, their voices swallowed by the vastness of the forest. They printed and distributed thousands of missing person posters. This was more than just a search. It was an act of defiance. For 10 long months, the Wilson family lived in a state of agonizing uncertainty. In April 1995, nearly a year after she disappeared, their search came to a devastating end. Ramona's body was discovered by a local man near the Smithers airport, just off the highway. But finding Ramona was not the end of their fight. It was the beginning of a new one, the fight for justice. Her case remains officially unsolved to this day. The loss of a daughter, a sister, a mother leaves a wound in a family that never heals. For families of the Highway of Tears, grief is compounded by a torturous lack of closure. Instead, a gaping void filled with unanswered questions. Who did this? Why? Will they ever be caught? These questions haunt surviving family members every single day. The impact ripples outward, touching entire communities. Parents grow more fearful for their children. Young women restrict their freedom, always looking over their shoulders. The story of mothers like Matilda Wilson, who turned pain into a public fight for justice. The story of siblings who grew up without their sisters, and children who will never know their mothers. Their resilience, their courage, their refusal to be silenced, a testament to the human spirit. Their voices are a call to action we cannot ignore. In the early years of the disappearances, the police response was often, slow and disjointed. The cases were treated as individual, isolated incidents, not as parts of a larger, terrifying pattern. It often felt to them that their missing daughters and sisters were dismissed as runaways, young women who had simply left home voluntarily. As the number of missing and murdered women grew, the pressure on law enforcement mounted. In 2005, the RCMP launched a high-profile task force. It was called Project E-PANA. Project E-PANA brought a new level of resources and forensic technology to bear on these cold cases. The task force was able to officially link one killer. An American convict named Bobby Jack Fowler was linked to the 1974 murder of 16-year-old Colleen McMillan. However, this breakthrough only solved a fraction of the cases. Project E-PANA's findings point not to one monster, but to many. In the face of official inaction and deafening silence, the families of the missing and murdered women refused to let their loved ones be forgotten. Women like Matilda Wilson, Ramona's mother, became tireless advocates. They shared stories about their daughters, their favorite songs, their dreams for the future, their infectious laughs. Families organized annual memorial walks along the Highway of Tears, retracing the last known steps of their loved ones. They were the ones who coined the name Highway of Tears, a name so evocative and powerful that it forced people to confront the scale of the tragedy. As the movement grew, activists and artists found powerful symbolic ways to raise awareness and honor the victims. The empty dresses are a haunting reminder of the person who should be wearing them, a visceral symbol of the void their absence leaves behind. Similarly, the practice of holding up eagle feathers became a powerful symbol of strength, honor, and connection to the Creator. These powerful symbols were coupled with clear and concrete demands for change. They called for reliable and affordable public transportation along the Highway 16 corridor. The culmination of this decades-long fight was the launch of the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls in 2016. The tragic story of the Highway of Tears is not an isolated phenomenon. A map of Canada shows this is a national crisis. Indigenous women are about 4% of Canada's female population, but they account for 16% of female homicide victims. Activists and community leaders call this a slow-motion genocide. The lonely road in northern BC has become a powerful symbol. Its tears are echoed from coast to coast to coast, a collective grief demanding collective response. Over 2 years, the inquiry's commissioners traveled across the country, holding community hearings and listening to the testimony of more than 2,380 people. In June 2019, the inquiry released its final report. The report's conclusions were stark and unequivocal. It found that the persistent and deadly violence experienced by Indigenous women, girls, and 2 SLGBTQIA people constitutes a race-based genocide. Ultimately, the National Inquiry made 231 individual calls for justice. The question was no longer what the problems were, but what would be done about them. Indigenous communities themselves are leading the way, developing their own safety plans, revitalizing cultural practices that empower women. The story of the Highway of Tears is, above all, a story about people. It is crucial that we never forget their names or the vibrant lives they lived. Their memories are a sacred trust, carried forward by the families who love them. As we carry these stories forward, we honor the women by ensuring their loss was not in vain. Hope is found in the young people who are reclaiming their languages, reclaiming their cultures, reclaiming their power. This future also depends on education and allyship. It requires non-Indigenous Canadians to engage in the uncomfortable but necessary work of learning their own history. Ultimately, the goal is to create a Canada where a stretch of highway is just a highway, not a place of tears. It is to build a nation where Indigenous women and girls are cherished, respected, and safe to live their lives to their fullest potential, free from fear and violence. The memory of the stolen sisters demands it, the resilience of the survivors inspires it, and the strength of the next generation will achieve it. The Highway of Tears can and must become a road to a better tomorrow.